Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for tuning in for episode 5 of the Winners in Business podcast, sponsored by Beachfront Custom Development and Impact Business Marketing. I'm your host, Andrew Rosenblum. Our guest today is Debra Jennings. Debra is an accomplished executive in the pharmaceutical space, having driven several organizational transformations around digital technology and client experience in the past. We discuss those technological trends, and additionally, we dive into strategies for supporting female executives, risk mitigation and contingency planning, and her upcoming book for readers who want to show up as their best self every day. Let's jump in.
I spent some time working in digital, and we're really proud of the work we did. Our corporate goal was to launch 2 products. We launched 4. We came in time and under budget, which was great. And we were able to scale those products across the business. And everyone's like, well, what's your secret sauce? And I always say it's 3 elements. It's the 3-legged stool. The first is making sure you have digital expertise, operational excellence, as well as a communication strategy. Just because you build these products doesn't mean people are going to know they exist or they're going to use them. Mm-hmm. So the 3 different trends for me that I've seen in my experience in healthcare that I think are here to stay are essentially wearables. When you think about devices that patients wear, to be able to track their patient journey, what are their pain points? What are the benefits they're getting from the therapy? Are there any things they're learning from their experience? And by having those wearables, it generates insights and provides real world evidence. And with that data, it really helps us better understand and improve on the healthcare experience for our customers. So wearables is one. The second, as you probably would have guessed, AI. Everybody's talking about AI these days. And I think AI is important. There's a time and place for it. It's important to embed it within the fabric of your organization to understand how you can use it internally and externally. But I also think that you have to innovate responsibly and determine where is your organization at, right, on the spectrum. Are they digital evangelists that they want to be intentional and aggressive with their strategy, or is your company more on the conservative side? And I've seen all kinds of companies on different positions on that spectrum. Mm-hmm. And then the last is telehealth, right? We knew from the pandemic that digital was accelerated to meet patients where they're at. A lot of patients were going into the hospital for therapy, and now they didn't have access to that. So telemedicine really transforms the way we meet patients where they're at. And I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you speak a lot to the design of the digital transformation. So how do you, let me ask, why might it be a struggle for organizations making digital transformations, like that design phase? And what do you do about that?
I think having the right people around the table is so important. And I'm so glad you asked that question. I had developed, what I found successful is I developed a governing body. And I found that it wasn't just what we were doing that was important, but how we did it, how we showed up for one another. And I always say when you're developing a governing body, make sure the people can split 2 pizzas. Because if you have too many people there, you're going to over-engineer it. You're going to get into analysis paralysis. And by hand selecting the people I wanted on my team, the 3 C's, they had attributes, which was be curious, collaborate, and challenge the status quo. Have one heart and one mind, move in the same direction, and just clearly understand the why behind it. I think for me, the people are more important than actually the what. If you get the right people around the table, the possibilities are truly endless.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on that topic of team building, I mean, you're very involved. You're an alumna of the Women Unlimited program. You're a mentor in a lot of different organizations. I'm curious, what strategies do you believe are most effective in developing and supporting female executives, and how can companies foster that more inclusive environment?
It's a great question. I would say, honestly, Andrew, it starts from the top, right? It's important that your leaders are all singing from the same hymn and aligns, whether it's topics on gender parity or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And not only that the leaders are on board, it's also setting those corporate goals, so that people understand across the board and working in harmony what the goals of the organization are all about. As you mentioned, affinity groups, super important. I would say build affinity groups within your organization so that women have a place of belonging. Mm-hmm. And affinity groups outside of the organization are as important, if not more, because you can get those fresh perspectives and learn from amazing leaders across the globe. I'm an alumni of the Women Unlimited program, learned so much in my early career. I was a mentor for the Health Business Women's Association. Highly recommend that. They have fantastic programming. And then also just recently became a member of Chief. And I've learned from so many wonderful C-suite female executives in my learning journey, because I truly am a lifelong learner. And, I'll share a personal story as a leader, because it's those leaders that make the movement within an organization. I was in my digital role, and my manager, who was one of my sponsors and mentors, noticed that a lot of my male colleagues from time to time would interrupt me. And so I remember him pausing a meeting and just asking for people to just stand down and allow me to finish my sentence. And so it's those type of acts that create the most impact, right? You can have things on a board, you can have goals, but to actually see leaders conveying that, it becomes almost contagious. So I'm forever grateful for sponsors like that. And I would say to the females that are watching, and the males, like, networking is so important. Find those mentors and sponsors that are going to help you at the end of the day on your career journey. And, Andrew, I've been really impressed with how far we've come, but we just still have so much work to do.
Right. No, absolutely. So when, let's say a young female professional is looking to find those mentors, and I guess this could apply broadly, but, for me, I've been in sales maybe about 10 years. That's been a big part of my life. And so when I approach people who I would love to learn from, it's a little bit strange for me not having any value to offer them. So I'm kind of curious, how can someone like myself, or, a young female professional, approach those mentors and get them to say, I really want to invest in this person, even though they've never made a single red cent for me?
It's a great question. I do feel like those mentor relationships need to be win-win. And funny enough, what I usually tell my mentees is that senior leaders love to talk about themselves. So start the conversation with learning about them and the advice they have to give you. And then talk about the second part of that conversation should be what you aspire to do. And then working with that mentor or sponsor to really understand what their advice is, and understanding at the end of that conversation, hey, what keeps you up at night? And are there things that I can do to drive impact to help support you in what you need to do? And, these networking conversations don't need to be extremely formal. You can have a cup of coffee with someone. That's why I say these affinity groups are so important, because you might actually run into a future mentor or sponsor as well that have, commonalities in what they're trying to achieve within their business.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's wonderful advice. And I want to make sure that we get to a topic that I was really fascinated by. So you have an MIT certification in business continuity planning, and particularly focusing on the pandemic. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned that businesses should apply to remain resilient in the face of future global disruptions?
Yeah, if there's anything that's certain, it's change. And I think businesses need to hire employees and talent that are comfortable with working in spaces of ambiguity. I think I go back to the how and the what when you're building out these plans. Build the teams that are agile in their attributes, and that, as my professor said at MIT, when bad things happen, get out of the basement, open your eyes, and get to work. Because a lot of the times when I've been part of natural disasters or pandemics or product recalls, there's just a lot of chaos and a lot of swirl, right? So it's critically important to identify risk mitigation strategies in advance, do simulations, make sure you're training people often so that they understand if this thing does happen, what you need to do. And in going back to the who and the how, again, building those governing bodies of people that can get stuff done, that are fiercely collaborative, that challenge the status quo and going to continue to be curious. In the pandemic, I'll give you an example. At that time, I was leading a patient services team for a rare disease community of patients. And these patients had to go into the hospital to get their therapy. And all of a sudden, they couldn't leave their home. And so I knew at that moment, I wanted to be a change agent and do something for them. And I also knew one of my favorite African proverbs is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I couldn't do this alone. And so I started to think about what I needed to impact to allow these patients access to therapy. And so I worked with my policy team, got them in a room to ask how could we kind of evolve the policies with payers to enable patients to get therapy at home. I pulled in the delivery system, who is responsible for delivering the product as well. And then I also pulled the payer team in. I couldn't have done that alone. I needed those people at the table to say, hey, let's start with the end in mind. Our goal is to minimize therapy disruption for patients. How do we do this? And when you're doing that with one single mindset and the heart of thinking about the why, it was for the patient, we accomplished some pretty amazing things together. So I always go back to the what and the how. And in that situation, we brought hope to meet chaos. So it was just one of the most challenging and rewarding times of my career, to be honest.
Well, and it's people like myself, all sorts of people who don't recognize that work that's kind of going on behind the scenes, but it's allowing us to continue getting the healthcare that we need. Now we're just finding, oh, wow, well, the people innovating this, they had a really good idea in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's a really good point, Andrew. Actually, before you go out and save the world, make sure that there aren't existing policies or processes internally. Don't reinvent the wheel. So it's also important when I met with those folks to say, hey, have we seen something like this before? Or are you familiar in your network with other groups who have done things? So I think that's really important. What do they say? Imitation is the purest form of flattery.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say policy team, are you talking about like getting the governmental affairs people involved, or are you saying more like internal policy? Because if it's governmental affairs, that blows my mind. I don't even know how you start to dip your toes into that.
Yeah, it's actually governmental affairs, because Medicare was one of the major payers, CMS, Medicaid and Medicare. And so we had to work with our policy team to say, hey, how can we write letters to our policymakers to amend some of the policies where it says the patients can only receive treatment in the hospital? So it was, the first time in my life that, I learned more about the complexity of changing those policies and, for the sake of our patients at the end of the day.
Wow. That's incredible. Was that at the federal or state level, or local, I guess, but that would mostly be state or federal, I'd imagine.
Yeah, the way we looked at it, we treated kind of N equals one. So as the patients came in, we would work with their particular plan at the state level. But at the same time, running parallel, of course, that's a bigger beast to tackle. We were, kind of trying to understand how could we impact federal, because a lot of the times when you impact federal, it trickles down to the state level. Mm-hmm. Because time wasn't on our side, we didn't have time for that. So we would end up just evaluating each patient case and determining who's their payer, what does their policy look like, does it work for them right now, is it going to make them have therapy disruption, and if so, how do we work with those particular payers and policies to really just transform and evolve what those look like.
That's wonderful. You're starting with the end in mind. That
Absolutely.
Seems to be a theme.
You have to see the forest through the trees at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I know that you've actually been working on a book. You had some people approach you and say, hey, we'd love to hear more about your lessons in a longer format, like a book. I'm curious about, and I'm sure our listeners are going to love to read that when it comes out. But can you tell us about that book that you're writing?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. And, when I talk about leaning in, I was part of a TEDx talk about a year ago. And the story worth telling was Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch. And it was one of the hardest things I ever did, but I'm so glad that I did it. And a year later, a publishing company reached out and said, hey, we really like your message, and we want to know if you want to partner with us to build out this idea, this concept on a bigger platform like a book. And maybe like some viewers, I suffer from imposter syndrome, and I'm like, who am I to write a book, right? But then I thought about it and I said, why not me? And so, I took the call with the publishing agency, and a funny story about this is that I thought it was a scam, and I took the call anyway. And then I researched this guy. His name's Eric. And I found out he's a Georgetown professor, won a bunch of entrepreneurial awards. and is a renowned author. So sorry, Eric, if you're listening. I promise I'll be one of the best decisions you ever made. So that's kind of what that process looked like. And the book itself is, trying to show up as the best version for yourself. And that can be personally or professionally. And it's based on 9 different principles, 9 different elements. And each chapter coincides with the word belonging. So when you think about B, that is about being curious. When you think about E, embracing change. L is leaning in. O is optimism with caution. N is networking. I is eliciting feedback. N is nurturing your narrative. And then G is growing your legacy and giving back as well. So those are the things over my 3 decades of working. I've seen good, I've seen bad, and have had lessons learned, best practices. To me, those are truly the 9 principles. If you can really learn from them, you can show up as the best version of yourself, for yourself, in business, and also professionally as well. So maybe this time next year when the book's released, Andrew, we'll regroup and I'll have something more to share with you.
I would love that. I'm kind of wondering how someone like yourself gets imposter syndrome. I guess there's a certain point where you have to say, why not me, like you did.
Yeah. It's, in a lot of the affinity groups I have for females, and thank you to Brené Brown, who's another one of my favorite authors. She really told us about and taught us about vulnerability and the art of imperfection. And what she taught us is that when you're vulnerable and you lean in, that's the birthplace of innovation, as I said. And to be a master of something, you have to start somewhere. And I think naming the vulnerability just makes you a real person as well. And you're likely to be more approachable and surround yourself with really good people that are going to set you up for success at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So when you speak about a personal brand and nurturing your own narrative, I'm wondering how that happens. So how does somebody determine what their personal brand and narrative should be?
Mm-hmm. It is a great question. So my call to action to everyone viewing this podcast today is you must and you have to have a personal brand statement. And the reason I say that is it truly anchors you on who you want to be and who you want to show up as the world as. And so my personal brand statement, I look at it every 3 years and I evolve it depending upon my environment, the role I'm in, and what I'm looking to accomplish. And my current brand statement is this: I am a servant leader that harnesses strategy and culture to help create and transform the business to provide continuously optimal business and people outcomes. So I think when you look at a personal brand statement, it's almost like modular, right? You have to use action words. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to serve? How do you want to do it? And again, it's always with the end in mind. And for me, it's harnessing culture and strategy to create optimal business and people outcomes.
Wow. So would you say is it far afield to say this is a little bit like having your own value proposition?
Absolutely. Similar to a business, you need to have that, especially going back to the networking sessions and mentoring. If you show up and you have this personal brand statement, those executives are probably going to really think like, wow, they've really thought through where they are today and what they want to be. And it also helps when you get into an elevator, perhaps with the president or the CEO, you have your elevator pitch going up maybe those 6 floors that you're able to share, what your values are, what you're looking to achieve, and who you're looking to help.
Wow, that's incredible advice. You have such a comprehensive grasp on getting things done. I'm curious. Anytime I talk to top professionals, they've just learned so much through trial and error that you can't go to a business school and learn that. So, do you have any examples of that sort of wisdom that our listeners might benefit from?
Go back to my TEDx talk. And the story I had worth telling was culture eats strategy for lunch. And so let's not get it twisted. Strategy is critically important. You need it. However, if you're not investing in your most important asset, your human capital, you're not going to be able to deliver on that strategy. And so my talk was really about leading with curiosity. Be curious, not furious. Don't jump to conclusions at the end of the day. And the other piece we talked about is adjusting your communication style. Right? You could have a team of 10 people and they're all very different. You have your introverts, your extroverts, and it's really important to understand how you want to show up and communicate really effectively with those people that are responsible for getting things done. And another thing I've learned along the way is this thing called toxic politeness, right? Toxic politeness is very dangerous. It's like being on a hamster wheel. It's a lot of the same, right? We're not getting anything done because we're just agreeing to agree because it's much easier. The antidote to that is radical candor, which is caring thoughtfully but challenging directly, right? So if you're sitting in a room and in your mind you're thinking, this is the worst idea ever, right? And why are we talking about the same thing? And yet, our business output hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. I really think it's important to have that radical candor. You don't have to be a jerk when you're saying things. It's all in how you say it. But unless we get out of the space of toxic politeness and having those, controversial conversations in a really thoughtful way, you're not going to get stuff done. And it's about building trust at the end of the day. And, what do they say? It takes, months and years to build trust and seconds to take it away. So that's why I feel so passionate about just developing a playbook to share with people on, showing up as the best version of themselves, because I truly believe that leads to getting stuff done.
Absolutely. Before we sign off here, and I want to make sure that we get, an idea of where our listeners can reach out to you and stuff. But I am curious, actually, is there anything going on at your current organization, understanding that it's a little bit new, you're still getting your feet wet, but is there anything on the horizon that's really exciting for you?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I'm still drinking from the fire hose a bit. I think it's day 11 for me. And this organization, Kyowa Kirin, is just amazing what their values are and what they aspire to do, which is essentially develop life-changing products for patients that have unmet needs. And one thing that struck me, this is a Japanese company, is they had this word called wa in the onboarding training. And I'm like, what is this word wa? And translated into Japanese, it means harmony and in collaboration. And I've never quite seen an organization that has one mindset and moving in the same direction, for the sake and in the name of the patient. So I'm really excited to see the current portfolio of products growing, that the patients that are in need of those products are finding their way to them. And I'm also really excited about their pipeline, right? The pipeline that will go on to support additional patients in the future as well that have those unmet needs.
That's incredible. And you're just bringing up so many questions for me. Since we have a few minutes left, I'm curious. You're so involved in gender parity efforts, and I'm wondering, as an organization puts more emphasis on that and moves towards it and makes real progress, what changes?
I would say, having gender parity, right? Again, starting with the end in mind, it really changes the conversation a little bit. I think, having a culmination of soft skills and hard skills and people that know how to have those conversations that include radical candor, I think that's critically important. And, at the end of the day, it's not an easy path, I've learned. And I think it's also really important for leaders in the moments to demonstrate, them taking action towards the goal of gender parity. So that's where I find the most gratitude and the most joyous moments is those leaders that get it, that start including more females and also underrepresented talent in conversations. Because, there's plenty of statistics out there you can read is the more you have gender parity and the more you have embedded DE&I into the fabric of your culture, that helps with innovation. It helps retain talent, right? It helps decrease the amount of turnover as well. And when you think about that, that's a pretty good proposition for businesses.
Absolutely. We wouldn't have people like yourself if we weren't, let's say, allowing or encouraging all people of all sorts to get into the professional world at any level. We wouldn't have people like yourself building great teams and building great products.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the kind comments, and it's been such a nice chat today, Andrew. Thank you for all the really thought-provoking questions.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. So for our listeners who want to learn more about you and keep up with what you're doing and, keep track of how that book is progressing, where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, I would say my profile is available on LinkedIn. It's Debra Jennings. And if folks feel the need that they want to network or ask me questions, you can certainly reach out to me via email at debra49jennings@gmail.com as well.
Excellent. We'll include those links in the show notes. Once again, Deb, it's been great to have you on the show, and I'd love to connect again after the book comes out, if that sounds good to you.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for your time today and letting me share a story worth telling.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for your time. So for all of our listeners, stick around for a quick recap. And again, Deb, thanks a lot and keep up the great work.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We covered a lot of ground today, but just to recap a few key points. Debra shared key lessons learned from her MIT education and pandemic response to provide practical measures for risk mitigation and contingency planning. We also covered critical trends in digital technology that companies need to prepare for. Finally, we touched on her journey that took her from a TEDx talk to writing a book, overcoming imposter syndrome, and showing up as the best version of herself every day. Keep an eye out for updates on its release, and we hope to have Debra back on to discuss its publication when the time is right. Again, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'm your host, Andrew Rosenblum, and you're listening to the Winners in Business podcast, sponsored by Beachfront Custom Development and Impact Business Marketing. See you next time.